Morning, everyone. This is Lee with TFS. I'm the current chair of NETX CDN. We'll get started real quick. I'll hand it over to Keith here shortly. But Bill approached us about having another steering committee meeting. Really, there's been some inquiries as far as some of the steering committee members and others, not really hearing a lot throughout the year. You sort of get the HIP proposals or the HIP RFP once or twice. That's about it. So this was just a meeting, an effort to sort of realign everyone and give some background on what's been going on. I know there's been some. There was a very quick turnaround RFP for HIP over the Christmas break, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then of course an overview of the CDN from Keith, and there's going to be some change in leadership as well, and so talking about that, and both in the working group and at the chair levels, and then once again just a progress report on HIP and funding and where our current funding is as well. Annie, I apologize. I'm on the road today, so I'm sitting here in a Family Dollar parking lot, a pickup truck. So I don't have my setup with my computer and everything. But so Annie, I don't know if you want to do a roll call of just the steering committee members, if you have a list of those folks.
Mute myself. Yeah. Let's see. Also, just a reminder to mute yourself. And if you have just now joined us, please put your name in the chat box so Bill can keep track of who is on this meeting. And then let's just make sure we have all the steering committee members. Laura Ashley Overdyke, are you on? Don't think she. We have Rigo. I saw Rigo joined us. Neat. Brian Pope. Was he planning to join us, Bill?
He had accepted the invitation, but I don't see him on the.
I don't see him either.
Yeah, he's been in and out this last week, and so if you didn't see him join, he's probably not coming on.
All right. David Bezanson. I think I saw you on.
I'm here.
All right. Steve Lang, talked to you earlier. Marcos De Jesus. Are you on?
Yes, I am.
All right. Steve Airy. I see you
on.
on. And
Yes.
Eric Dorkop. Did I say that right?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Good deal. We have everyone. Perfect. I think, Lee, at this point, we can turn it over to Keith.
Yep, that works for me.
All right. Keith, I give you, I don't usually share my screen, so stop. All right. Take it away, Keith.
All right. Let me get this thing cranking. Y'all see the slide? Y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank y'all for giving me this spot on the agenda, and thank everybody who is in attendance. We wanted to start slowly and build momentum. So we start with me. Get that thing out of the way. What I'm going to do is give you a quick context for where the CDNs came from a local joint venture perspective. Talk about
Keith, you're muted again.
Oh, now
All right. I think
there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. There we go.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So we go up. I'm gonna run through where the CDNs came from a joint venture perspective, talk about some basic functions, expectations, and capabilities as we see them. Just a quick sampling of outcomes and achievements of CDNs across the board. And then I'll end with a little bit of information and maybe tee up later discussion about subgeographic working groups. So getting into it, you can see us there, the Lower Mississippi Valley Joint Venture, one among 18 other habitat joint ventures in the US, composed of two fairly distinct geographic regions, the Mississippi Alluvial Valley and where we are, West Gulf Coastal Plain and Ouachita. One of the things that we try to make clear, and sometimes it's tough, is, well, who is the joint venture anyway? And when you hear people talk about the joint venture, what they're usually often talking about is joint venture staff. What did the joint venture do? What has Bill Bartish done lately? What's he up to? What did McKnight screw up when they talk about the joint venture? Well, that's the staff. And certainly we're a pretty recognizable part of the joint venture. We are paid full time to worry about and to do joint venture things. There's also a management board that really is has the ultimate say in what our priorities are and what we work on, what we do. And sometimes people are thinking of the board when they think joint venture, but really there's a huge array of people that are the partners, that are the folks on this phone, minus one who's a joint venture board member and a couple who are staff members. And it's all of these that make up the joint venture. And it's especially the partners that make all this work. The partners are the folks that are out getting things done. And so when we talk about the joint venture, when I talk about the joint venture, unless I've really messed up, I'm talking about you, folks on the steering committee, folks in the CDN. You are the joint venture. If not for you, we wouldn't have one. So why does it matter anyway? What is it that the joint venture, what is it that we are supposed to be doing? Well, when you strip it all down to bare basics, we are supposed to be providing capacity to convene, support, and maximize partnership, and partnerships specifically focused on bird conservation, bird habitat conservation. And if you look at our mission, that is the development of a vision, cooperation in implementing that vision, and then collaborating to refine that. And all of that really within the fence of supporting national and international bird conservation initiatives. So if we just take one example, take the Partners in Flight land bird plan, you think of stepping down those international objectives to our joint venture, to this region, and ultimately stepping all that down to local priorities, the things that happen on the ground. And equally and conversely, all those actions that happen locally, if we've done all this the way we're supposed to be, then add back up to contributing to those national and international bird conservation plans, those initiatives. And it's really the joint venture that is supposed to function in making sure that all those connections are made and that's happening. Now that's really a mouthful to talk about taking large scale objectives, winding up with meaningful action on the ground. The way that we organize our thinking and our prioritization of tasks and functions is this nifty idea of strategic habitat conservation, biological planning, conservation design, delivery, monitoring, and research. But this really isn't very strategic unless all those parts are working and they're connected to the other parts that they're supposed to be connected to. And ultimately, what really matters in this is that delivery gets done and gets done well. And we always keep that in mind, that the rest of these pieces of the wheel are intended to support that effective delivery. So there's a couple of really critical assumptions to make in the proper functioning of this thing. One is that all this planning and design that you see coming from the joint venture partnership is done in such a way and is communicated in such a way that it actually informs delivery. That's pretty key. That the delivery itself is coordinated and optimally effective. That's a pretty key assumption. And finally, that those delivery outcomes inform future planning. In other words, we're paying attention to what we're doing and we can make adjustments. We're able to make adjustments in our planning, design, priorities, whatever facet of that you want to talk about for future biological planning and design and then ultimate delivery. If you think about the constellation of plans, designs, priorities, maps, and all that you've seen flow up on the screen there have all come from and through this joint venture partnership. You're a delivery biologist just trying to get your job done. It oftentimes can look just like a bird's nest. And so one of the things that we want to make sure is that it is not, that we're putting all that together in such a way that it makes sense. Well, the management board back now more than 10 years ago realized that these pieces, these connections, some of these assumptions probably weren't happening as well as they should. And from that came the idea of conservation delivery networks and partnership coordinators like Bill Bardish to try to make these things, facilitate these things happening in a way that resulted in better conservation. So conservation delivery network is intended to be a forum where all these agency staff coordinate on the ground delivery of what might otherwise be independent efforts and prioritize what they're doing such that we're targeting the highest priorities with the greatest chances of success. So there are two real primary functions in a CDN. One is communication, coordination, and collaboration. And a really important piece of this is, and we'll talk about the group in just a second, among delivery leaders, really importantly, to include organizations, obviously within the management board, but organizations that don't have a seat on the management board. Texas A&M Forest Service is not a management board member. There's a really important component, important partner within this conservation delivery network. Cattle Lake Institute, not on the management board, not a problem. They are a key player and sit at the table within the conservation delivery network. This gives us the opportunity to find a really important place for folks, organizations that aren't necessarily management board organizations. And the second function is that communication between planning, design, and delivery, and two-way coordination, making sure that those plans and designs, tools, maps, whatever, are useful to delivery folks, and providing a conduit for delivery folks to say, yes, that's useful, or no, it's not useful, and here's how we can make it better. So for this specific CDN, established back in 2012, approved by the management board and led by Texas Parks and Wildlife to provide the leadership. A couple of key elements of a successful CDN as we've come to see, and one is partner leadership. In order to keep this thing from being something that Bill Bardish is doing, all Bill Bardish's ideas or my ideas, anybody else's, We need leadership from the partnership. Of course, Lee is providing that as the chair right now. Also want to acknowledge our past chairs who have plowed a bunch of ground ahead of Lee, and Laura Spate and Jason Estrella with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And I appreciate them individually and appreciate Texas Parks and Wildlife and Texas A&M Forest Service for allowing folks to provide that leadership. We need dedicated joint venture office staff to help coordinate. Bill Bardish provides that for us now. And I want to acknowledge Bill Shook, who did that for a number of years ahead of Bill. And then finally, the composition of the group. We'll talk about that for just a second. What are key attributes of this group that comprise the CDN? One obvious thing is that they share similar resource challenges and opportunities. We're speaking to really the geographic extent of the thing that we're calling the network. Physically meeting is feasible. And if you think about this CDN, about 200 miles from top to bottom, from corner to corner. So you meet in the middle, nobody has to travel more than 100 miles. You can get together in a day and go back home. At least you could prior to a year ago, and hopefully will soon. Both of these really speak to the geography of how you organize the CDN pretty clearly with North. This was important that it's a critical mass of staff who are responsible for delivery. We're really not looking for representation. Our board does that. There is a representative from those organizations. That's not how the CDN really is meant to function. We want as many as we can get of the delivery staff from all the organizations for a variety of reasons we'll talk about in a second. And then finally, the group take responsibility for the outcomes of the CDN because they are empowered to choose their own course. They're empowered to choose what the priorities are, what the activities are, and what they're not. Some expected outcomes, pretty basic: increased communication among delivery staff. I've said this now for over 10 years, and it's no less true today. Delivery folks, like land biologists, foresters, go down the list, they are busy with their head down getting their job done, and oftentimes are not, it's difficult to look up and look around because your head's down doing work. And so the CDN provides an opportunity to take a pause every now and again and communicate with other folks that are doing things, similar things to you. And we'll talk about what you understand already. All of that really to capitalize on what might be otherwise lost opportunities to share equipment, opportunities to partner on a project, opportunities to utilize match for a grant, opportunities to get information that you didn't have, a whole list of those. One of the expectations is that the CDN provides facilitation for a unified voice to potential funders, to landowners. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. There's an expectation that the CDN applies a more focused and strategic approach to collective efforts. And I show the graphic there because this CDN's priorities are a perfect example of what we're talking about. Identifying priorities, both geographic and functional, where we expect to get the best outcomes for the investment. We expect, as a result of all of this, that there will be increased resources that are dedicated to these priorities. And there are a couple of these pieces that feed directly into that. I can promise you, we have funding now, not potential funders, but real funding, to the Northeast Texas CDN that provide those funds precisely because the CDN has identified priorities, works together, has mechanisms to make decisions, and is focusing resources strategically. And then finally, we assume that all of that's going to result in bigger, better, measurable results. So just a quick look at CDNs as they exist today. That's the map of them. We have 2 in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, 2 in the West Gulf Coastal Plain. See some blank CDN space there south of us, but in fact, Jenny's on the phone. The Texas Longleaf Implementation Team, you can see the geography of that group that functions very much as a CDN. And you can see the overlap in those 7 overlapping counties. Fortunately, we have lots of good coordination and communication, and the boundaries don't really make a whole lot of difference other than recognizing where funding opportunities and resource opportunities are. And just to look at the respective priorities, very complementary between those two partners. One more thing about this CDN's geography, you'll notice something that looks a little bit squirrely here on our map. That dark stuff represents the Lower Miss Joint Venture footprint, and you can see there's a pretty significant portion of this CDN that's not in the Lower Miss Joint Venture. It's actually in the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture. Requires that we coordinate with those folks. We can always coordinate better, but the decision was made, and this is an example of the partnership being empowered to make its own decisions. Very early on, folks decided that they didn't want to stop at the Lower Miss Joint Venture western boundary and include more of what we all consider Northeast Texas. And so we have a CDN that spans those 2 joint ventures. Not a significant issue, just one to point out and recognize and looking at what turns out to be kind of a funky map for a joint venture. So CDNs in action. It's just a quick run through of the kinds of things that CDNs throughout the joint venture have done and are doing. And I'll show the ones that are specific to or shared by the Northeast Texas CDN in blue. Terminal credibility workshops out in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, working with delivery partners to become more familiar with agricultural practices so that they're better able to communicate with potential landowners, potential cooperators. Leveraging private foundation dollars for increased capacity to deliver conservation. The map there's an MAV example, but we've got the same thing in this CDN. Invasive species awareness through working dogs, that is unique to this CDN. Whole bunch of funding through Wetland Reserve Enhancement Program and counting. CDNs actually prefigured and continue to support the tri-state partnership that we could go into, but parts of you probably don't care much about. This CDN administers a private lands conservation program, actually so far unique to this CDN within our joint venture. Partnering with NRCS to promote and deliver wetlands reserve, developing forest management guidelines, advancing shortleaf pine restoration and management, and one that's up until this spring unique to this CDN as a CDN partnership effort, monitoring the response to our habitat work through looking at priority birds. And CDN specific geographic and functional priorities that we've already talked about. So the last thing that I'll end on is a quick look at sub-geographic working groups. For those who were not around when this mapping product was developed, it was really the first attempt at some geographic prioritization. Well, there's a little bit of white space. It's not a priority if everything is priority. But because folks don't like seeing things untended to. It really ended up being more of a watershed map than a priority map. Well, along came our priorities that most, if not everybody on the call, are now familiar with. So the need to view those sub-geographies as priorities was no more. And so we're really left with the question of how do these local groups, these sub-geographic working groups, best leverage their potential power. And the folks in leadership at the time when these were coming up had some ideas about things that might be accomplished, might be taken on by these working groups. And I'll just run through a handful of these. One was to facilitate having the partners coalesce around key areas within the sub-geography. Are there places, according to that group of partners, we'll say in the NETX working area, are there places where they all agree we really should gang up on this piece of the map and let's focus there? Are there particular practice types, subsets of what's available through HIP that we think really ought to be happening here? Are there some practice types within our geography that we really think are not that important, that we should avoid? And as a group decide, this is what our proposals, our HIP proposals are going to look like because of those realities on the ground. We had encouraged that the sub-geographies with multiple proposals for HIP could rank those. I don't care what the score comes out to be. Steering committee, we strongly recommend that you fund these two. We want you to fund them all, but if you only fund two, these are the two we want you to fund. Collaboration in pursuing other funding opportunities. We've seen that for sure in one of the sub-geographic working groups. And any other ideas driven by the needs of the group. So the idea was that there may be some unique resource challenges and opportunities that local group facilitated by this idea of being a sub-geographic working group could pursue as part of the CDN. And just one illustration of what folks are thinking is that this is a map that is slightly dated. I don't have the latest dots on the map, but if you see where projects have begun to coalesce, it could be that there's a full court press by that sub-geographic working group to say, yeah, we want to facilitate having more projects in close proximity within a landscape within these areas where we're seeing things start to stack up, to be more meaningful as a collection of conservation practices within a landscape than a random scatter. So that's my quick and dirty of how we got here and what does it matter. I don't get time for questions or discussion or move on. I'll unshare and sit back and listen.
Questions or for Keith or any thoughts that came up from anyone? Any comments anyone would like to make? I feel like it's important to stress that we probably have not stressed enough in recent years is the steering committee has a responsibility. They're not here just to say thumbs up on projects, but in terms of setting priorities, establishing leadership in these within these working groups, and identifying conservation needs that maybe are coming up that we need to get ahead of before we find ourselves looking at them in the rearview mirror. And you know, it's that typical concept. You know, the steering committee is there. If you see something that you have a question about, if you see something that may not seem to be exactly right in terms of setting priorities and funding, if you see something that you need to have clarified, say something, raise your hand, bring it up to the rest of the steering committee, bring it up to the chair, and talk to us about it, because that's the whole reason that we have a collaborative group. Get to know and communicate with those working group leads. They're the next level of communication that work together on the ground in a localized area. The whole idea of those working groups is to have people that are within an hour drive of each other that can discuss who is doing what on different private lands, who's working with other state and federal landowners to promote conservation. Those are the types of things that we want to hear about. So any comments from anyone right now? And some of you are first time hearing this material from Keith, so it may take a while to digest, but we'd like to get some feedback, and don't hesitate to use the chat box if you have a question or a comment.
Hey, Bill, this is Marcos.
Yes, sir.
Trying to find a raise hands option here. I can't find it. I don't use Zoom very often, but I just wanted to thank Keith. I'm one of the newer people here on this committee, and I get to learn a little more every time I sit down and listen to everybody, and I really get to appreciate the great work going on. So thank you, Keith, for that presentation. For sure, that was clears up a lot of things for me. Being from the inland fishery side here at Texas Parks and Wildlife, we're not set like wildlife is, where we can actually work with the private entities. So I'm just kind of marginally sitting here, waiting for those opportunities to interject something. But if you want some of our perspectives, I'll be glad to share it as a steering committee member. A lot of issues we have in inland fisheries, especially in East Texas, that come from poor management practices on lands close to in riparian areas. So a lot of times siltation becomes a big issue, and I know it's a huge issue in East Texas. And if some of these projects close to the water, like I know we're doing NETX River and some others, any of those projects that could focus on maybe restoring riparian or lowland habitat, with the mind of maybe generating some plant material or rooted material that'll actually stabilize these shorelines, would also benefit fisheries down in East Texas, which is an interest of ours. And then at that point, we might have some funding availabilities for some of these projects, with some new opportunities that are coming on. So we're putting together this program called that has to do with our fish stamp money that we get from our licenses, and we're trying to divert that money to partners that want to work on habitat or access projects in public water. So if any of these private landowners are adjacent to public waters and they want to probably potentially jump into those funds, they could actually do so in the future when this all gets put together, and we could actually work together in those opportunities.
Thank you, Marcos. We learned a lot last summer in your presentation on the opportunities to work with inland fisheries, and some of the things especially resonate in the Caddo watershed, where there's some significant restoration efforts ongoing with the Big and Little Cypress in Black Bayou. Participating in Robert Spate's meeting last week they have with the Water Management District was very enlightening. And I think continuing to find those connections through those efforts through Robert as the working group lead and Laura Ashley Overdyke at Caddo Lake Institute are going to help us expand our horizons there. And I know that this post-COVID revitalization is something that everybody talks about, but we really do need to use this opportunity to move forward. You know, to re-energize the steering committee, let them recognize what their responsibilities are and how they can make us more effective. And Lee and Annie and I had talked about successional planning and continuity. We think it may be important for steering committee members to identify an alternate that can participate. I saw where David Bezanson and Brandon Belcher are both on today. David initially was very clear when he said, I doubt if I can always make the scheduled meetings since he works statewide, but he has Brandon here as an alternate, and it helps maintain that communication within the Nature Conservancy as to what's going on in Northeast Texas. It may be something that the steering committee would like to consider, and I thought I'd throw that out as something to think about and possibly discuss more this summer. But various agencies and organizations, whether it's NRCS, whether it's the Fish and Wildlife Service, Parks and Wildlife, you know, look at an alternate to be part of that business structure to help us maintain continuity. Any other thoughts from folks or from Annie or Lee on that?
No, I agree, Bill. You know, it's hard to make all these calls, and a lot of the folks that are on the steering committee members have you know, pretty demanding positions, and so I think it's definitely reasonable to ask for a couple, you know, a backup or two, you know, especially if you're sort of the lone wolf from your entity or agency. It's nice to have somebody else that at least representing your company. And Bill, do you want to talk about working groups and you know, potential, well, some changes happening there and people leaving and all that now, or are we waiting on that?
Yeah, I think this is a good time to talk about, you know, moving forward.
Yeah. So Keith showed that map of the working groups earlier in the or at the end of his presentation. And for those that aren't aware, you know, most of you know, those were probably established, I don't know, 6 years ago or so. Some of them are more successful than others. You know, I've sort of battled with sometimes the need for working groups too, because, you know, we are getting a lot of HIP projects in, but you know, I think in areas where those working groups aren't as active, I think it would be best, you know, if they focused around a project, something like Keith was talking about, and, you know, if nothing else, you know, find a project somewhere that everyone has some buy-in on, and even if not everybody on that working group is really involved in that project, at least get them out on the site and thinking about it, and trying to expand from there. And you know, just having a meeting, I understand, always isn't necessary at that level. But I think there are a lot of missed opportunities from those working groups not meeting. So there are going to be some changes or some retirements. Actually, Larry LeBeau is retiring from TPWD, and he is the Sabine River working group lead, and so they'll be looking for a new lead in that working group. And there's, even in other working groups as well. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for someone, and it may be someone that's not even on this call, but if anybody on this call is aware of someone maybe new and up and coming, wants to get more involved, there's a lot of room for growth at that working group level. Also, there's a change. I'm going to be taking, or I have taken, a position in Central Texas, and so I'm stepping down as chair, at least at some point. In the COVID world right now, it's not too hard to continue to support the CDN since it's all virtual. But as we transition back to getting into person a little more, it's going to be more and more difficult for me to be involved. And so looking for a chair, and in my opinion, probably be good to try to find a vice chair too, if there is one. I know that's the position that they originally suckered me into, and that's why I got suckered into the chair position. So, but that's if anybody has any ideas, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from the steering committee. And I think the way, Bill and I have talked a little bit about it, Nanny, but grabbing a couple names, from the steering committee and then voting on it from there. And so if anybody has any names or is interested in doing it themselves, that would be great. And I'll be around as much as I need to. And Bill and Annie do so much work with the CDN anyways, and so I'm not nothing's going to fall through. I can guarantee you that. But I see that Bill has the working groups listed there, and so that's pretty much everyone, all the watershed working groups. And that's really all I have, Bill.
Thanks, Lee. And Annie, if you have any thoughts, I just, what we're in the process of doing on the Texas Longleaf implementation team is a process that I think would work well for our CDN, is that we have established a working group or an ad hoc committee, a search committee of the coordinator, Jenny Sanders, myself as interim chair, and Hugh Simpson, who's our administrator for T-Lit, since they host the grant for Longleaf Alliance. So the three of us are working with steering committee members to ferret out potential names and talking to some of those candidates. And we intend to present a steering committee chair recommendation to that steering committee this summer, by July, possibly this spring. So that's the way that we are working it in that partnership to the south. We think that that type of framework will work well here with the Northeast Texas CDN. So I'd like feedback from the steering committee about that, or any comments. Doesn't have to be now, you can put it in the chat. But Marcos made a comment about raising your hand. If you go to the bottom of your toolbar, the lower right-hand side, there's a pretty little smiley face there with a plus sign. It says reactions. If you click that, right-click that, you get a raised hand signal, or you can also clap or do a thumbs up, or you name it. So that's the Zoom way of raising your hand. So hope that helps. And I would like to reiterate that if you came in late, we're asking participants to put their name and affiliation in the chat box, so we have that for the record. And with that, I think we've talked enough about successional planning. And again, if you have a comment or chat question, or just put it in there. But I'd like to, Keith brought up a really good point about our connections with the Oaks and Prairie joint venture. The OPJV and the Lower Miss Valley joint venture have done a lot of work together, and we continue to try and make sure that we're not confusing partners and working as closely as we can. I think they're working much more closely with the NRCS, since they're part of an RCPP program. I think I was going to turn it over to Derek to say a little bit about the OPJV and how we're working together, and introduce himself. Jim Giacomo, as you may know, is taking another job, and I won't take Derek's thunder. Derek, feel free to jump on and
Sounds good. Thanks, Bill. I think I met most of you, but if I haven't, I'm Derek Wiley. I'm the Conservation Delivery Specialist for Oaks and Prairie Joint Venture in Texas Parks and Wildlife. I just started that position back in January, but before that, I was a coordinating biologist delivering RCPP in the CDN area in our 5 counties that we share with y'all up there in kind of Northeast Texas. I wanted to point out that we will be hiring a replacement. She'll start April 12th. Her name's going to be Katie Biggs, and we'll definitely want to get her looped in with this group whenever she starts, and start doing some good things up there. In our 5 counties that we have up there, we've done a few projects, but there's been, I guess it's been kind of tough getting some projects going up there, but certainly would like to coordinate with y'all more and put more grassland projects on the ground. Y'all tend to focus on the creek bottoms when we can help in the uplands, so that tends to merge pretty well, at least in my mind, with projects that we could do, and we both emphasize the same thing with prescribed fire and that type of stuff. So I think there's definitely opportunities for us to work together well in those 5 counties. That's Fannin, Delta, Red River, Lamar, and Hunt counties. I think that's probably the Red River working group area as well. But to add to Bill saying that Jim Giacomo is leaving, it's going to be some big shoes to fill. He's been the coordinator for, I don't know, 10 plus years. But if anybody was interested in that, that's on the American Bird Conservancy website for looking at that job posting. If you happen to know anybody that would be a good joint venture coordinator, or somebody that's wanting to be a joint venture coordinator, please pass that information along. Other than that, I think that's about all I have, Bill, unless there's some questions or anything along those lines for anything OPJV related or partnership related or anything like that.
Derek, that's fine. Any questions for Derek or the OPJV folks? I'm gonna go ahead and suggest we move on to Annie Farrell's presentation on our progress report. I've got some information about the desired future condition for wildlife in bottomland hardwoods. Some good news to share about our efforts over the last few months, and I'll bring that up later in the partner discussion. But again, use the chat box if you want to bring a subject up, and we'll cover a lot of Q&A and feedback towards the end at that point. So Annie, I'll turn it over to you. Annie's been our administrator and our vice chair and our technology specialist, and she does about anything that we need done, and does it better than I can, for sure. So Annie, again, thank you for the progress report and everything you do. So it's all yours.
Thanks, Bill. I really don't know what I am at this point. I just have many hats on. But for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Annie Farrell. I am a district biologist with National Wild Turkey Federation, and I cover all of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. And then I also administer the HIP and the various list of other things that Bill just mentioned. But I'll go ahead and start here. This is just an overview of the HIP funding that we've gotten since 2017. Some of you may remember, and for those of you that weren't involved yet, Texas Parks and Wildlife had some funds back in 2017 that they said, can you spend this before the end of the fiscal year? Kind of just to make a long story short, we signed an MOU between TPWD and NWTF, and we had a very quick request for proposals, or we went out and found our own projects. I don't even remember at this point, but we were able to complete 6 projects in less than 2 months for that $136,000. They were some pretty big projects, very expensive, lots of mulching, because that is what we could get done really fast. But basically we were able to prove that we could do it. And that set us up for several more years of funding. We had a new MOU that was signed in 2018 and 2019, during which time we completed another 8 projects for $120,000. And at this point too, we had submitted a NIFWIF proposal. We got it. That's the green that you see, $120,000 there. It was a much larger proposal that included position support for Bill and some monitoring and science and outreach funds, I think. But 128,000 of that was for on the ground work through HIP. At that same time, we did an amendment with Texas Parks and Wildlife, added 2 more years of funding to the standard HIP, and through this year, 2021. And then also in 2019, Jason Harden got involved and helped set up the Neches River Habitat Incentive Program, where we had a $300,000 PR grant to spend on private lands in the Texas Parks and Wildlife designated Neches River priority area for wild turkeys. Because this was a federal grant, we were only allowed certain practices that had no ground disturbance. So we did an RFP for prescribed fire and herbicide projects. And then we also had to go through the extensive federal clearances, the Section 7 for endangered species and archaeological clearances to do all of these projects. Looking ahead into FY22, Jeff Rosh is going to talk about this in a minute, but we don't have any funding currently set in stone, but NWTF and Parks and Wildlife are working together to get something set up so that we can continue the HIP. And then there was also another NIFWIF proposal, and I can't remember if we've gotten it or not, but that was also in the pipe. So here is a distribution map of where we've had projects since 2017. For those of you that haven't seen this map before, it includes the 29 counties that are considered part of the CDN, along with the CDN priority areas and the blue shading that Keith had shown earlier. It also includes the Neches River priority area for wild turkey restocking in red, that red outline. And that's where the Neches River Habitat Incentive Program exists, and it does extend slightly outside of the CDN area. So that's why there's a couple of projects outside of the CDN counties. But onto the dots, the colors are divided out by years that the projects were completed. You can see high concentration in the Neches River priority area starting in 2018. We had already had a good number of project submissions from that area, but then it drastically increased when we started that Neches River HIP. And then also, if you're familiar with the Eastern Wild Turkey super stocking programs, you'll see that there's a really high concentration of projects in some of the co-op areas. So that's great news to me. We've had a lot of good projects and proposals come from those areas and the co-ops, and there's a lot of engaged landowners that figured out that we had a program for them, and they're wanting to create good habitat so that they can give their eastern birds that were translocated the best chance at survival. So that's great news to me. Over there in the left corner box, you can see that we have completed 38 projects so far since 2017. We still have 23 in progress this year, so you can see how that number has just gone up and up and up, and the demand is definitely there. So those 23 are in progress and hopefully will be completed by the end of this fiscal year, or several other projects had April 15th deadline. So we're working on getting those all completed and the funding spent. Here's a quick overview of the projects that were completed in the standard HIP for the 2019-2020 RFP year. We had only completed about 40% of the work in 2020 and ended up extending the project deadlines for almost half of the projects. So the projects listed down in the bottom are the projects that were extended. There were several extenuating circumstances this past year. Wet winter. There were several contractors that weren't able to get the work done because of they were worried about crew safety due to COVID. And then there were a couple that the landowner had some struggles due to COVID and couldn't afford to pay for the projects up front. So there was money involved, problems, and then also safety issues. Some landowners weren't comfortable having contractors on their properties. So we basically ended up extending half of those projects. So this is what is currently in progress. We had an RFP last summer and approved 12 new projects to go along with the 7 projects that we extended. So far this year, we have only completed 582 acres out of our planned 4,876. So that's on paper. That's what I have reimbursed so far. We actually have completed about 1,500 or 2,000 so acres that I know of. The burns have been completed, but not yet certified by project managers. And just this past week, actually, I started getting photos and hearing from project managers about completed work. So that's a good sign. I'm hoping that the majority of these projects are completed. And then here's the Natchez River HIP overview. For the top graph is what was completed, and the bottom is what is in progress right now. We completed the 6 projects on top. It was mostly prescribed burning. It was nearly 100% of what we had planned. So that's fantastic. It's a very successful program, and I'm really happy with the results we've gotten from that. This year, we have 7 new projects, again, that are mostly prescribed burning. We had some major delays this year getting the archaeological clearance. So several of we hadn't completely funded or approved everything until mid-March, really. So that kind of ate into a lot of people's burn windows. We luckily were already working on a no-cost extension to the MOU between Parks and Wildlife and NWTF. So we'll be able to extend those agreements if the landowners were not able to complete their projects. I do know of at least 2 of them that have already been completed though, and not yet reimbursed. So we're at least doing that. And I should mention too that here, these projects all have to be completed by the end of August because the funding from Texas Parks and Wildlife goes away at the end of August. So those do have to be completed, and then these are able to be extended if the landowner needs it. So I think that about covers my portion. Do you want me to turn it over to Jeff now, Bill? Or are there any questions from anyone?
Let me turn my mute off so you can. I do appreciate, Annie, the summary and juggling all the money that comes in at different years that has to be separated. It can't be combined. It has to be reported differently. I think there's at least 5 different reporting entities that we're dealing with that all require a little something different, you know. So it not only is the accounting separate, but the reporting and the format for the reports is different. So thank you for your attention to detail. And
yeah, I think this is like 5 different grants that we're all managing for one program. So
yeah, quite a job.
It's a puzzle.
It's gonna get worse.
Good.
So yeah, we wanted to bring Jeff Rosh in to talk about, since he is our direct connector to Texas Parks and Wildlife and some of the migratory and non-migratory stamp funds that we use, and some of the other Parks and Wildlife funding sources. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you and let you speak Uh,
Sounds good. All right, can you everybody hear me? So it sounds good.
Yes.
Bill just put up this sign here. This is, there's been some talk for a while now about wanting to provide some gate signs for the landowners in the HIP program. And so this is in progress. I think we have to go through our prison system for this, but I've seen paperwork that suggests that this is sort of on our way. And so, so that's pretty cool to kind of be able to move forward with this and have something to kind of showcase the projects with the landowners and on their gates and stuff. So we're going forward with that. And I'm going to build on Annie a little bit, and then maybe we'll tie that stuff back together. Parks and Wildlife is going to continue to, support this program in a big way. Continue the funding levels with standard HIP that comes from non-federal sources. We're going to continue that on an annual basis at $100,000 or 85 on the ground dollar levels for the foreseeable future, and raise that number when we can. So we tried that this year. We were able to have some extra funds this year of an extra 50,000, and that was the the rush HIP job you guys had to deal with in December, I guess, or I don't know when that, those couple of weeks you had to throw projects together. And just an update on that. And I know some people are probably frustrated, but probably nobody's more frustrated than me. It's just a nightmare in our agency to get agreements and contracts through our process in any type of a reasonable manner. And so it's a real limiting factor for conservation in our organization, and this is just part of that process. Annie, I know you and I probably should talk about this together, but that agreement's supposedly in your shop. I don't know if that's made it back to you, or you have any update about where signatures are in your shop with that. And you may not even know that. So I don't know if you had any comment there.
Yeah, I didn't even know it was in our shop until I saw your email.
Okay.
And I've tried to check with Tara to see if she has it, and I haven't gotten a response yet. So I'll keep everyone updated though.
So from that standpoint, I think it's, unless the Turkey Federation has some huge issues, which they won't, this is supposed to be a dang amendment, to the agreement. It wasn't any language change, so it shouldn't be any deal. It's, we don't have the ability in our organization to even deal with amendments in a more efficient way. So having said that, there probably needs to be some thoughts in the short term here about what we're going to do with those RFPs, especially if we've lost our burn window, which it seems like we probably have. If there's comfort level with people moving ahead, I don't think you can are there agreements in place with landowners in all those projects, or?
No, we never set up agreements until
Okay.
we were waiting for the funding to come through.
Yeah, that's what I figured, and that's the way it typically has to work. So I think based on what you were saying, Annie, about you're in kind of an unknown period of time on where you are with completed projects to date, waiting for sign-offs and invoicing. It seems like maybe that Bill, you, Jason, and me at sometime in the next couple of weeks, and maybe reconvene and see where we are and see what it makes with what projects we have proposals for, and where do we need to make adjustments, and what kind of funds we have left. Does that make sense? Is that something that seems like something we probably should do, just to kind of see what money we have left, what projects did get done, what haven't, what still needs to be done, what adjustments need to be made, and kind of put a dollar figure on some of that?
Yeah, I think that'll be good. And then we also have, just recently had a project drop out and terminate their agreement with NWTF. So there's potential there that we're going to have extra funding of folks that can't get their burns in, or aren't interested anymore.
Okay.
So we're gonna have a lot of funding. We should talk about projects.
Okay, and we're not talking about it more here. Going forward as well, we want to continue with the NETX focus area dollars as well, kind of in that funding range to date that you saw on the Excel spreadsheet that Annie provided. Again, that has a federal nexus that provides an extra layer of things where Jason and I are trying to work internally to see if we can make that process more efficient. And so we'll wait and see on what comes of there. I know there's some coordination going on with the Region 2 as well, as trying to find a cleaner path forward with some of those checkoffs, especially when we're dealing with fire related stuff. So, and again, Annie, you and I haven't really talked about this in either, but so there is some really interesting good news coming down the pipe. Here, there's been an exercise internally within Parks and Wildlife to deal with some extra Pittman Robinson funds that we have banked over time here and need to kind of spend down that balance. So we did some RFPs with projects across the state, and the JV staff, and based on some conversations with you guys in the field, are thinking there maybe is a window there to think about larger scale fire-related multi-year projects, something where we can really take large bites of landowners' properties, probably a lot of the TMO type projects, where we can do maybe multi-thousand acre projects, and that would be something that people could count on for a multiple year. And so that proposal has been selected for funding going forward for the next 3 years, and that'll represent an input into maybe another, a third leg of this funding of how we manage our projects, which we go to larger scale projects. And Bill, I'll let you kind of dive into any detail that I'm leaving out here, but it's going to be, we're getting ready to bring $660,000 to bear over the next 3 years to try to do a few larger scale projects that people can count on for more than 1 year. And so that's pretty exciting. That's a big investment here. It will have a federal nexus. One of our discussion items around the federal nexus issues is we'll be doing larger projects. So maybe the checkoffs for environmental review and SHPO would be, wouldn't have to go through, have to do too many of them in order to spend down the money to get the larger projects that we're looking for. So that's brand new, though none of that paper was finalized. This will be something that we'll start later in the year, and probably looking at burn season next year. But that's pretty cool stuff right there to really start making some large chunks, taking some large chunks out there. Bill, do you have anything you want to add to that as far as the potential, the new money coming down the pipe?
Well, definitely. I think this has probably perked the ears of a number of the program managers out there, and some of our work group leads, the group leads, and the issue that comes up is that we cap our HIP proposals at $20,000. So we get a number of these 19,990 proposals from these large lands, which going back to Keith's presentation, the whole purpose of a CDN is to be strategic and put our conservation dollar to where we're going to get the most good, so we can have landscape scale impacts that promote species like the eastern wild turkey, those open pine conditions that need to be 5, 10, 20,000 acres in size. It takes forever to do those in 100-acre blocks. So when we can get the Bobcat Ridges and the White Rocks and the Glendales, the areas within that Neches River corridor that tie directly to the TLIT significant geographic areas, we can start making a huge impact, conservation impact on the landscape. And so we're hoping that we can use this to our advantage to bolster what we've been doing through the traditional HIP RFP. So hopefully that makes sense to folks, and we're looking forward to trying to find this innovative way to make even further strides. When you look at the accomplishment of the last 5 or 6 years of HIP, it's significant. And the fact that 80+% of those acres come through prescribed fire, that's a management routine. That's not a one and done. It's not like planting bottomland hardwoods and leaving them alone. every management action is going to take recurring actions, and prescribed fire is one of those that we need to really stay on top of or we'll lose our investment. So I've said way too much, but that's my 2 cents worth, maybe 4 cents worth.
More to come. This stuff happened really quick for how that proposal got put together, and it's kind of exciting to see that we actually got something out of it. So it's going to be fun to implement.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody can see the screen I popped up, but I had put this as part of my partners update. But this does come from Upland Stamp, so it's not migratory bird related. So it will have, because of the federal nexus, cultural resources compliance component. Natural resources should be fairly easy, but it is open forest, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be just structural in component, not necessarily has to be species based, but it's more structure based. And we do have our new CR coordinator. We just hired Eric Schroeder. He's a former veteran, UT professor, owned his own cultural resources consulting company, done a lot of work, mostly out west, but some in the southeast, but almost all of it has been in Texas and New Mexico. So we have that asset at our disposal as well. So this is something that we did kind of put together at the last minute, but we were wanting to do something that was habitat related. So often or not, when we have these residual federal funds, it's sometimes often hard to be creative in how to spend them. But since it looks like PR receipts are going to remain high potentially over time, at least through the current administration, potentially, we are looking forward to maybe being able to continue to renew this in the future as well. So as long as we can find that match, that's usually the key. If you can find the match, it looks like we're going to have the federal funds to partner with this for at least another 3 or 4 years.
Good news for everything. For East Texas, for sure. I wanted to give Will Newman a little bit of time too to talk about opportunities for other grants. He and I have been talking about our CPP, another option. Annie talked about the proposal we have in for NIFWIF already. We're always chunking that plug in the water. You can't catch a fish if you're standing there at the dock watching. So we're chunking that plug. We're gonna catch some fish. You just got to keep that bait wet. So Will, you might want to just throw in a couple words about what we've talked about with our CPP and working lands as possible options going forward as well.
Sure. I guess since you mentioned working lands, I'll throw that out there. Working Lands for Wildlife is a sort of a model for delivering NRCS programming, primarily EQIP and CSP. There's a program in the eastern United States for bobwhites, and Texas joined a national request for that project to be elevated to a national project. That was declined at that national level, but Texas NRCS proactively joined the existing program where state managed funds for EQIP are dedicated to that project and practices that are determined beneficial for that project species. So we've got some positions coming on throughout Texas, none in the CDN area right now, but there is a large potential for funding to continue to increase over the next couple of years. And there may be priority areas designated that would overlap with this geography. And so there might be some funding, not only for work on the ground, but also some more coordinating biologist type. So that's something out there. But on the RCPP front, that's a Regional Conservation Partnership Program, something that's been used successfully with several of our other partners in other geographies. And within this joint venture in other states, there's been some successful applications and programs being put on the ground. That program now takes two forms. One, the classic form of that program with EQIP and CSP type incentives directly to landowners. You can also use ASEP or easement type programs, and now even some short-term rentals to apply conservation practices and get paid on an annual basis for that conservation. And then there's a new form of that program called the alternative funding arrangement. It existed in the old Farm Bill, but now it's sort of parsed out as its own funding budget. And this is something where there's an open application period for partners right now to submit applications to NRCS to join this program. They've set aside $75 million for 15 projects this year. These projects are really intended to provide innovative approaches to leverage those federal dollars and pay for performance on large scale projects. So they want to do things that they can't actually do right now through the Farm Bill. They don't just want to pay incentives like they do with EQIP. They want to pay for conservation delivery results and outcomes. So there's been a lot of those that have been awarded in the last year that focus on putting forward some new strategies to incentivize landowners and do some things that are not in the Farm Bill. So there's an opportunity to put in an application for that closes on May 28th. It'd be kind of a rush situation, but Bill and I and some others have been talking about what this might look like. So I would encourage this group to start thinking about RCPP in both of its forms, either for this application period for the alternative funding arrangement or any other projects as we move forward. If there's a need for more funding and we can find a way to provide the match, which PR grant money that was just mentioned, at least the current interpretation for the Farm Bill is that we can use those federal Nexus dollars for match funding on RCPP project proposals. So, so there may be an opportunity to take that PR dollar amount and turn it around and use it for match on an RCPP project. So I'd hate to see that go unutilized. So we would look for some sort of innovative way to deliver funding onto the ground for landowners. And that would come with a healthy investment from NRCS to support a project and also to help fund for capacity to deliver those projects. There is a webinar on April 1st for partners and potential partners to learn about the alternative funding arrangements for RCPP. And they've asked that people email rcpp@usda.gov if you want to be part of that webinar. One more caveat on the notice that went out for this proposal request was they highly emphasized that a significant portion of the funding of these projects will be related to climate smart agriculture and forestry. They're going to encourage adoption of climate smart agricultural practices that produce verifiable carbon reduction and sequestration and create sources of income for rural Americans. So I think that a lot of what we're doing within the Conservation Delivery Network can be phrased that way. We certainly are delivering those outcomes. So it just comes in a way where we have to position it where those are deliverable outcomes in addition to the habitat outcomes that we're already getting. So just a couple of opportunities there. I'll take any questions, or Bill, if you have anything else on that.
No, Will, I just I wanted people to know that that those are some opportunities we're really looking close at, and that continuing to have that discussion, because they could be substantial if we hit it the right way. No
doubt. And we don't want to rush. I wouldn't want anybody to feel rushed on the deadlines that we keep coming out with this stuff. It's going to happen once or twice a year for each version of RCPP. The moral of the story here is for us to have something prepared so that when the next one comes out, we can really take advantage of that opportunity and not miss like Keith mentioned, not miss opportunities because we weren't communicating as a group.
Good point, Will. I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to make a quick stab at saying that we went through a marking effort to develop a desired future condition for wildlife in bottomland hardwoods. It's a process and procedure that has worked very well in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, and we're trying to bring this into East Texas. And I think we had a very successful effort in Bowie County 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, as an initial attempt. We marked 100 and some acres of really pretty bottomland hardwood to promote better bottomland hardwood conditions on a WRP site, working with NRCS and Fish and Wildlife Service. Steve Airy was there, Darren Clark from Temple, and Will Blackwell, and of course Holly Attaway at the district office. Anyway, long story short, we anticipate more efforts in bottomland hardwoods to promote better wildlife habitat conditions and to promote wetland conditions as well. And that's something that Jeff Rosh mentioned, that our HIP funds can be utilized for this as well. So let's keep that in mind moving forward. And I just, Jenny Sanders is on. Just, we wanted to make sure people know that we have a TLIT connection. We work well and constantly together. We're hoping to hear soon. They have applied for the Texan by Nature Wrangler program, and we're hoping to hear something soon. So stay tuned on that. Jenny, any other points you wanted to bring up before we open it up for partner news?
I don't think so, Bill. Sorry, I'm actually driving right now. I had to run to another meeting, but no, things are going well with the TLIT. We really appreciate the partnership with the CDN and the overlap with membership, and just look forward to continuing to work with y'all. We've got an RFP coming up on the 15th of April. Looks like we're probably going to have more projects than we can fund at this point, but I think that looks good for future funding for from NIFWIF's perspective. They want to see that we're putting everything that we get on the ground in conservation. So we're hopeful that our next round of NIFWIF funding will be, we'll get fully funded and be able to continue longleaf restoration efforts. So that's all I have.
Okay. I just real quick in terms of dates and times, we anticipate an RFP, traditional RFP in May, June, like we've had in the past, not specific on dates or times yet, but be looking for that. We also are looking at trying to schedule a September 7th or September 14th all hands CDN meeting, Northeast Texas CDN meeting in September. We'll go out with a doodle to nail those two dates down. If anybody has any showstoppers you see on the 7th or the 14th, let us know. But we're keeping our fingers crossed that might be our first face-to-face. We'll see. It's been a while. So with that, both Texas Parks and Wildlife, Texas Forest Service, I wanted to give some of the agency and organization folks time on task. David, Nature Conservancy, you have anything? But I'm going to turn it over to Steve Lang, Parks and Wildlife, to add to what he mentioned previously about partner news. Anything that you think in the next 5 or 10 minutes we've got left that people would like to hear?
Yeah, Annie, can you unshare? I'm going to try to reshare my screen again, if that's possible. That button's been staring me in the face the whole time, and now all of a sudden it decided not to work. Okay, can y'all see a screen now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, we've already covered this. Again, this is going to be an extension of this. Hopefully by our next meeting, we'll actually have the ability to outline our RFP for these funds going into our next fiscal year. And like Jeff Ross talked about, it's really to expand the existing program to get larger acreages. Very often we get smaller properties that we're just kind of taking little small chunks out of. Maybe this is a way to get one big project together for several of those areas. The second thing is on that carbon sequestration topic. Local Energy Group has reached out for assistance on scoping up to 2 million acres in East Texas for potential reforestation and carbon sequestration. They have initially scoped this project based on outputs from loblolly pine and rusty wood. And they want to chime in later. I think it was, two tons per acre per year was their metric. Not sure where they got that or what research they're basing that on. But their initial scoping study has selected locations based solely on their proximity to power plants and those emissions. It's not necessarily a requirement from the program, but it's obviously from a marketing perspective, I think easier for them to get buy-in. Just an example of what's been done in the past, we actually have a public example of that in East Texas on the Old Sabine Bottom Wildlife Management Area. Back in 2003, this was a cooperative project with Reliant Energy. Environmental Synergy was the company at the time that was actually doing the planting or the sequestration banking. Conservation Fund was kind of a third party to help facilitate this with the landowner. And then eventually the Parks and Wildlife Department acquiring this tract as part of that management unit. It was planted in 2003. It was hand planted with dibble bar. We actually had a flooding event that occurred just at the end of this. They had to actually come back and replant some acreage they couldn't get to because of flooding, but we had good soil saturation. In 2008, we actually went back in and did a survivability analysis, found that we had somewhere around 80% survival. This is a picture from 2013 where you can clearly see the planting rows. And when you turn 25 guys loose with dibble bars and white bags on their back, I had no idea that they could actually walk as straight a line as they did across this almost 600 acres of river bottom. It was pretty neat. Of course, the result today, these trees are probably averaging about 6-inch DBH. We've actually got some, mass production of some of our willow oaks and water oaks already. It was a typical MAV type of planting regime: willow oak, water oak, pecan. Can't remember exactly what some of the species were, but here it is. We're almost 20 years removed, and we've had a successful project to date. To be honest with you, we were never really approached again after this. This kind of fell out of the political and public scope. But obviously this is coming back up again. And if we have these other groups like an Environmental Synergy or others that could be potentially reaching out over time, this initial project that they're looking to reinvest in is actually looking to lease land, not necessarily own land. So they're just looking for property that can be reforested, trees put on the landscape, carbon being stored as fiber. And then at the end of that lease period, then obviously there's some sort of management goal or scheme at the end. In a way, I kind of encapsulate it as like a CRP, but using trees. And so it does have some utility to reforest some of our areas in East Texas, and it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds over time. And then very last but not least, we've got a job board here. We're going to be looking for a new wildlife management area biologist and a new district biologist. As we mentioned earlier, Larry LeBeau is retiring from District 5. We're going to expand those duties to include parts of Franklin and Titus County, as well as Smith and Wood from his traditional work. And then Adam Terry left the Piney Woods Ecosystem Project to join the U.S. Forest Service. And we're looking to fill that position under Bill Adams. And they would be primarily assigned to the Sam Houston National Forest, Alabama Creek Wildlife Management Area, and the Blue Elbow Swamp Tony Houseman unit there on the Sabine River north of Orange. And that's everything that I've got.
Well, that's great. That was a good summary, Steve. Thank you. David Bezanson, I saw you pop up. I was going to see if you had something from the Nature Conservancy side before I turn it over to Lee to talk about Texas Forest Service.
No, thanks, Bill. I don't have any updates today, but just enjoying hearing about all the good work.
Excellent. Glad to have you on, David. Welcome back to East Texas for a while.
Virtually.
And Brandon. Lee, I'll let you tee up the TFS updates. We're right at the 11 o'clock hour. So, anything that we need to share TFS side?
Yeah. So Jake Donlin, our East Texas department head, he's been department head of East Texas Ops since I believe last June. So fairly new, but he was a regional forester before that for the Central region and district forester before that in Southeast region. So and then BMP forester before that. So he's been around, been in all three regions, and just like to introduce him to whoever hasn't met him. I'm sure a lot of y'all know, right? But Jake, if you're on, if you wouldn't mind giving a quick TFS update, if you have anything.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Now, I don't have a whole lot, just glad to be a part of it, glad to come up to speed on this. I worked with Lee quite a bit on early in his career, and glad to see him get into a leadership role out in McGregor. And we have a backfill for him and Chris Kirby. Some of you may have worked with Chris Kirby on the Fairchild State Forest. He worked with Jason Ellis in a training capacity, and now is taking on the district forester role for Lee. We expect Chris to pick up where Lee left off, and so just looking forward to continued partnership with both TLIT and CDN, and of course working with all our partners in that area with Shortleaf Pine Initiative as well. So happy to be a part of the conversation today, and looking forward to seeing how TFS can continue to help and support this effort.
Well, great. Thank you, Jake. Thanks for being on. Is anyone else, any other steering committee members have any news to share before we'll let Lee close us out? Okay,
I just
Lee.
want to thank y'all so much for all of your incredibly hard work under hard circumstances and keeping everything straight. The recent get together with several of y'all about bottomlands is very exciting and interesting. I look forward to trying to be more involved in that as we move forward. Thanks.
Bill, if nobody has anything else, I don't really have anything either. Just thank you all for being on. I know we're hitting the mark at an hour and a half, and everybody's probably growing weary of Zoom calls at this point in the pandemic. But appreciate everybody taking the time to be a part of this. And if you have any questions or comments, I know a lot of y'all have done this in the past, but feel free to call or email Bill, Annie, or myself. And if you didn't feel comfortable or didn't see it necessary to say anything in front of the whole group. So with that, I appreciate y'all being on, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah.